So welcome everyone to this session. My name is Victoria and I am today's event moderator. I'm super excited today to be moderating Generalist or Specialist, a balancing act. And I'm super excited to welcome our amazing speaker for this session, Ashwini Vasanth. So a little bit about her. Ashwini is a platform architect at DevRev. She has nearly 2 decades of experience building products in a wide range of areas, including security, networking, video, storage, cloud infrastructure, and embedded systems. She has worked in a wide variety of roles, including RF systems design, distributed software engineering, embedded systems, and product management. She hosts a podcast called Through the Corporate Glass, where she interviews people specializing in different fields to explore their career choices. She loves to talk to people from different backgrounds and learn through their experiences. So thank you so much, Ashwini, for being here today. I will now pass over the session to you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That was a very graceful introduction. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about a topic that's pretty close to my heart. It's called Generalist or Specialist. I know Victoria spoke through most of my profile, so I'm going to skip talking about myself and go right into the topic. So I'm going to start with just defining the specialist versus generalist. So a specialist, of course, is someone who's known for their technical depth. And technical depth could mean different things to different people. But essentially, it's about mastering a particular area or technology. And it often includes spending many years just trying to learn the field, but also gain experience in it and refine your experience over a period of time, because no field is static. So every field has new developments, and a specialist is expected to keep on top of all of the details of the field. So I would put it, the one-line summary would be, to be able to get mastery, you're going to be spending a lot of time going in depth into a particular topic. A generalist, on the other hand, is, I guess, a Jill of all trades. Essentially someone who's exploring a variety of domains, but who's essentially known for problem solving rather than mastery in one particular area or domain. So you would know a lot of different areas, but you wouldn't know any of these areas as well as a specialist in that area actually knows it. So very broad definitions, and I'm basically going to talk through what a generalist and what a specialist has meant for me in my journey so far. And we're basically going to build this up in terms of the story of my career so far. So I'm going to start with my very first job, which was a company called Lucent Technologies, most well known for being associated with Bell Labs Innovations. It was a networking company. So I started with doing a lot of network bandwidth optimization, traffic control, everything about networking. Now, this story is going to be built up in this particular slide, which is going to evolve through the course of this presentation. I'm going to talk about each of these boxes represents what I learned from each job. And you'll see this panel right at the bottom, which is building the skills that it's been adding to the portfolio, right? So we spoke about depth and breadth. So the breadth is going to be this horizontal axis that is going to keep building. And then the depth is going to be how they build vertically in each of these areas. So with the first job, I basically did a lot of low-level programming in assembly, in C. I worked in the networking domain, and then a domain called signal processing. What I did after that was, I'm sorry, looks like there's a bit of a lag due to the network delay. But essentially what happened was I mentioned these 3 domains in terms of networking, DSP, and then of course the programming itself. I doubled down on the signal processing domain and then went ahead and qualified myself in an institute called Indian Institute of Science, which is very well known in India. And I worked on a technique called vector quantization. I promise I'm not just throwing jargon around. There is a point to like explaining why I specifically mentioned vector quantization. We'll tie it back. But essentially, this was around learning more about image processing and compression. So that added to, I'm sorry about like the back and forth. For some reason, there's a huge network delay. So the slides seem to be switching slower than I expect them to. But you can see there's something that got added to the programming, something that got added to the DSP. And then I decided to work for a company called Nokia, which was very well known at that point for making cellular phones. And so I worked on radio frequency transceivers and building cellular communications and a technology called NFC way, way long ago in 2011. And I know it's very famous now in the context of Apple and having like tap to pay, but imagine we did this in 2011 and rolled it out. So it was very exciting. But what that ended up doing was adding another panel to my horizontal layer. Essentially, the whole communications piece, the embedded systems piece, this wasn't really related with anything that I had done before. So this was like an entirely new set of things that got added in the context of this particular job. But since NFC was an exciting technology, it just felt like, oh, this is so cool to be at the forefront of this technology. I ended up working again in the same area, but with Hewlett-Packard in the context of a company called Palm. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Palm because it was bought out by HP, and unfortunately, it was also shut down at some point, which is why it was a very brief stint at HP and Palm. And at that point, I started thinking about, well, now I have two options. Either I decide to double down on the area and then continue to work in near field communications and RF and so on. But then I knew that this industry was basically consolidating. And what that means is that a lot of people were trying to get rid of doing RF and NFC development in-house and just giving it to one or two companies which were doing this and then supplying it to everyone else. So the option became, do you want to work for, pick between two or three companies, but then stick to this area because you love it so much? Or do you want to diversify and do something different? And the choice I made was I wanted to do something different. So despite the investment and the height in this area, I decided to move away from it completely. So I went to a company called AlcatelLucent, which sounds awfully familiar, basically because it was a company called Alcatel, which merged with my first employer, Lucent. And so that was a new company. And so the domain was similar. It was networking. But networking in 2011 had shifted to a point where they decided to do everything that was done in hardware in software, using something called network virtualization and software-defined networking. And this was software-defined networking was kind of, again, cutting edge and super exciting in 2011. And that's what I ended up spending my time on over here. Now, the interesting thing to note over here is this somehow tied back to the experience I had on my first job because it gave me all the fundamentals to expand and build out something which is adjacent, but also leverages my previous skill. And so that's adding another layer called virtualization. Everyone's heard of Verizon, and I don't know how many of you have used a product called Fios, but I worked on building the digital video recorder for them in that context, and this expanded to the cloud as well as devices, and it added another skill set to my list, which was called distributed systems. Now, another interesting thing to note here is, apart from the virtualization piece that I mentioned, I worked on a bunch of other things in AlcatelLucent, which I happen to be able to leverage in my job at Verizon. So the blocks, when they are actually touching each other, signify that I was able to leverage a skill which I had gained at a previous job, versus these, which are completely isolated, essentially means I did not pursue anything with that after that. So moving on with the story, I joined a company called Nutanix, which was best known for developing storage and cloud networking. And I joined them basically because of my expertise in software-defined networking. So I was one of the first engineers for the cloud networking story. So that was exciting because I could leverage a lot of what I knew. But then it also gave me an interesting opportunity to expand in other areas. So I did work on virtualization, for network virtualization and cloud and things like that for a while. But then I decided to move into the security space and then build out a network security product and work on other things like rate limiting and so on. So if we look at the panel now, we built this up a little bit more. So you can see there are a few more programming languages. So there's a bigger stack over here. The networking has become a little taller, so a lot more added to the buckets. And then the virtualization piece also has something added. The distributed systems has grown because I worked more in that area over the jobs. And then we also added the security panel. So definitely we're expanding in terms of the breadth, but also trying to build out some of these areas vertically, which is bringing some depth into the picture. Now that brings me to where I am today. It is a startup called DevRev. And what we do at DevRev is bringing developers closer to revenue. And essentially all that is to say that we want to build products as engineers which are actually necessary for our customers, but which are also listening or based on feedback from the customers. And very often that transparency is not easy to achieve in the context of an organization. So that's what we're solving. And we're solving that using the power of AI to make a lot of these happen in terms of data insights, but also in terms of like recommendation systems and chatbots and so on. Now, the reason I described what we do in detail is for you to see that it bears zero resemblance to any of the other companies that I have worked on before in the past, which have been infrastructure companies providing products. So this one is more of a business software. But interestingly, even with this, I did have the ability to leverage some of my skills from previous roles. And so I was able to leverage some of my networking skills to put together some of these pieces that we needed. And I was, sorry about the switching. And remember we mentioned vector quantization. And the reason I basically mentioned it was, even though I did it in the context of image processing, it turns out that it's very useful today in the context of vector databases and search and AI and so on. So we've now added something else. We've added AI and search to the mix, but we've also built the programming stack a little further by adding more languages into it. And so that is where I am today in terms of the breadth and the depth. And through my journey, I'd just like to talk about a few things that have come up. One thing is, I guess, you have to have a strong foundation when you start, at least in a couple of areas, something to anchor you. But then the choice becomes, do you want to add more bricks onto the same foundation pieces, or do you want to build broad, right? And the broader you build, the more of a generalist or breadth that you will get, provided you do have a certain degree of foundation in each of these areas. And the higher you go, the more specialization or specialist you become. So this is a choice that each of us need to make. And like I said, It could be based on the fact that you are really interested in a particular field and you're fine to invest in it, versus you feel like you'd be better as a general problem solver applying techniques across different areas. Another thing that's come up, and I view myself more as a generalist, and one thing that comes to mind as a generalist is because you're working on different areas, you can do pattern recognition. So you can learn something from one field or one technology and apply it somewhere completely different. So I have a few instances of this. I did work on cellular phones in Nokia, which taught me to work within the constraints of small devices, small memory, small compute. And I could apply that practice when we were doing cloud software development, which was very useful because you're paying in the cloud for memory consumption and compute. Similarly, the vector quantization, which I pointed out, something which is in the context of image compression, but then I could apply it to the database world. And I've also found a way where software-defined networking principles can be applied to distributed systems and feature flag control and things like that. So there is a lot of application that you can do across domains. Of course, there's a balancing act. We started by saying it's a balancing act. So what is the balance? Now, with a specialist, because you're going deep in one area, you can actually move the frontiers of a field, which is exciting, which gives you a lot of focus and purpose. And it's also a much more focused approach because you're tracking incremental developments in a particular field. And so it's easier to stay focused and stay on track. As a generalist, recognizing patterns across different fields and opening up these new domains of innovation, that is what is actually exciting. And you have a larger range of opportunities. So basically, that's where I did want to end. I mean, I did want to end on the note that every one of our journeys is different. So we will never have one size that fits all. And so this was my journey. And I also encourage you to check out my podcast to listen to other people's journeys, where you can get more insights on how other journeys played out. Thank you so much. And do feel free to connect with me as well. That is my email ID. And yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Cool. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. So thank you, Ashwini, first of all, for presenting on how to balance between a generalist or specialist. I think we can learn a lot from her journey and what kind of things that she has learned throughout and how to leverage existing skills to learn new ones. So yeah, right now let's take up some questions.
Victoria, did I understand that right? Was it about whether someone who's starting out, whether they should focus on breadth or depth? Got it. Okay. So I think at least in my
and why?
Sure. So I think in my experience, what I would suggest is it's good to have some of these foundational pieces in a row when you're starting out. So I wouldn't go too broad, basically because you want to be able to establish a certain level of expertise. Even if you're a generalist, you need to know a domain to a certain degree before you move on to a new domain, right? And so when you're starting out, because you're starting from scratch pretty much, you have to start with a little bit more of a specialized approach. So that's my recommendation, to kind of pick one or two things and then go a little deep, at least for a few years, to gain a little bit of expertise and also to know for yourself what your interests are and whether you want to continue on that or explore other domains.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I think that was a good. And next, we have another question from Raynette Anus. Most job postings are looking for specialists, which is a challenge for generalists, since their experience are considered not enough in terms of years of experience for particle technology. What is your advice for generalists to get the job?
Okay, perfect. That's a great question. I think the interesting thing that's happening today is because the technology landscape is evolving so soon, I feel like generalists have a little bit more of an edge now. So it comes down to actually how you connect your experience as a generalist. So you might have expertise in a bunch of different domains, but as long as there are adjacent domains, you can actually make the case. And like I mentioned, if you're able to prove pattern recognition between something like embedded systems and cloud networking, right? So trying to find that pattern in the job that you're applying for to see what in your previous experience can tie to it, that should actually help a lot. But I'm also happy to
That's a good
connect offline over email and discuss any specifics if you prefer.
Thank you so much for everyone for sharing your amazing questions. And I just want to give a last big thank you to Ashwini for your time today and your amazing talk. I also want to thank everyone for joining this session and for being a great audience. So now